Well, would you look at that? A murmur ran through the crowd. Young, handsome, rich. You'd think he had it all, and yet it turned out like this. Guess they're right when they say money doesn't buy happiness. And why'd he even join the army? With a family like that, all the connections, the money. You're telling me he couldn't have dodged it? Maybe he was one of those idealists? Oh, come on. Have you seen his father? That man would sell his own mother if the price was right. And his son, suddenly an idealist? Hard to believe. I heard he didn't get along with his parents. Don't know what caused the fallout. Maybe that's why he went off to serve. Ran away, you could say. It was incredibly hard for Richard to hold himself back, but he still tried to keep a straight face and pretended not to hear the whispers. With each passing minute, though, it became harder and harder. What a place they picked for gossip and rumors. Here he was, grieving, and they were putting on a free circus for anyone who cared to watch. Can't we just throw them all the hell out? He hissed through his teeth once again, speaking to his wife. I've already told you, darling, unfortunately, that's absolutely unacceptable. Decency demands it. To hell with decency. Who even cares about that? Listen, this whole story already paints us in a less than flattering light, Rebecca said sternly. You know how this works. We can't turn away those who, like us, want to say goodbye to our son. As you can see, our status comes with its downsides as well as its privileges. She was so cold and calculating, it was as if she wasn't affected by what had happened at all. And even though Richard understood perfectly well that it was just a mask, even he felt uneasy about his wife's composure. After all, their son hadn't just died, he'd perished in a horrific and utterly absurd way, burned alive in some warehouse fire. The kind of thing you wouldn't even dream of in a nightmare. But they didn't come to say goodbye. They came to pick apart our family and feed off our grief like it's free entertainment. Well, what can you do if they can't afford any other kind of entertainment? Just hang on a bit longer, darling. They definitely won't be coming with us to the crematorium. It'll be over soon. Look, our cars are already up ahead. And Richard couldn't stop thinking that, in a way, those gossip mongers were right. There really had been a conflict between him and his son. A serious one, at that. And the worst part, it had started over something so trivial. So the boy had fallen for some girl, they'd have fooled around and gone their separate ways. What was the big deal? But Richard and Rebecca weren't used to that sort of thing. They had raised their son with strict discipline. Naturally, they'd explained to him that the family's wealth placed him several steps above all the ordinary people, excluding, of course, his own parents. And Alex was supposed to obey. For a while, he did. The boy was well behaved, studied hard in school, and later began learning the basics of the family business, which he was expected to inherit one day after his parents were gone. Everything seemed to be going just perfectly. But one day, that whole structure fell apart. And the reason for it came as something completely unexpected to Richard. He might have understood if Alex had lacked money or power that he could have come to terms with. But this he simply couldn't grasp. One fine day, after coming home from work, he decided to have a private conversation with his son before dinner. The two of them locked themselves in the study, and Richard chose to ease into the discussion. Alex, do you remember Ben, my longtime business partner? Of course I remember. He was literally here visiting just last week, his son replied with surprise. And do you remember that he had a daughter? Cheryl, I think her name was. Well, I suppose I remember her. Though vaguely. Last time I saw her must have been years ago, when we were just kids. Is she all right? Are you worried about her or something? Alex narrowed his eyes. Or are you just being polite? Either way, I don't really get why we're talking about her if nothing's happened. Well, let's just say something has happened. But it's actually good news. She's getting married soon, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be there for such a momentous occasion. Alex rolled his eyes. Naturally, Richard replied, and finally revealed the surprise he'd been holding back. I've never seen a wedding where the groom wasn't required to attend. His son blinked dumbly, as if he didn't quite grasp what had just been said. I'm saying, be happy, son. I've found you a wonderful match. You're getting married. In a few months. Did you forget something? Richard didn't like the change in his son's tone one bit. From smugly bored, it had shifted to something almost accusatory. Definitely not the kind of enthusiasm one might expect in a moment like this. What do you mean? I mean, Alex began, nearly raising his voice, that when it comes to major life decisions that affect my future, maybe you could have at least asked me what I think. Oh, really? And what do you think about it? I'm so glad you asked, his son said through clenched teeth. I don't want this marriage. But why? Richard was taken aback. Oh, I don't know. Maybe because I can barely remember the face of this so-called bride of yours, and I know absolutely nothing about her. And what if she's not attractive? Or what if we have nothing to talk about? What if we see the world completely differently? How am I supposed to live with her? I mean, I just don't love her. What do love and feelings have to do with anything? This is an incredibly beneficial arrangement that will increase both of our families' fortunes. Love and understanding don't matter here. Only poor people get married for reasons like that. We have other things to consider. People eventually get used to each other. Your mother and I, for example, never even met before our wedding, and as you can see, everything turned out just fine. But no buts. Richard was beginning to lose his temper. I heard your opinion, just like you wanted. The opinion of a foolish boy who knows nothing about life or business. You'll understand when you're older. My decision stands. You will marry that girl. The only thing is, since you're clearly not ready for marriage yet, we'll delay it. I'll give you 5 years to come to your senses. And so, things seemingly went back to normal. Richard decided not to bring up the topic again for the time being, and Alex didn't show any signs of rebellion on other fronts, which was a relief. Peace and quiet reigned in the family for another 4 years. But as the rescheduled wedding date drew closer, Richard began feeling increasingly uneasy. What if his son decided to pull something again? Of course, there was hope that Alex had grown wiser over time. After all, during their earlier argument, he was still just a boy. Now he was a grown man, he'd finished his studies, had gotten more involved in the business, and by now should have come to understand a few things about life. If that were true, there'd be no more issues. However, just a few months before the planned wedding, Alex made an announcement over dinner that stunned the entire family. Mom, Dad, I'm getting married. But not to your Cheryl, to another girl. I love her, and I'm not going to argue about it. You can't. His father shot back harshly. You've been promised to Ben's daughter for years. He's my longtime partner, and I can't let him down. Now hold on, Rebecca stepped in to defend her son. Alex, tell us about this girl of yours. Maybe you found a more advantageous match. I'm sure Ben will understand. But to everyone's shock, their son replied, I'm not looking at marriage as some kind of business deal. I'm getting married for love. She's just a regular girl, probably from a decent family. Let me guess, regular as in, How should I put this? Rebecca searched for the right words. What? One of those people who wants to help others and so decided to become a nurse. Alex said nothing in response. He simply kept staring his father straight in the eyes, defiantly. And may I ask, on what money do you plan to live? Rebecca jumped back into the conversation. My salary is more than enough to support a family, Alex replied. That salary is paid by me, Richard cut in coldly. And I can stop paying it at any moment if I don't like how things are going. What will you two do then? We'll manage somehow, the young man muttered, though the confidence in his voice had clearly faded. That's it. Richard practically growled. I forbid you not only from marrying her, but from even speaking to that girl. She's going to lead you nowhere. We will never accept some beggar into our family, and for her own good, it would be best if you broke off contact immediately. Am I making myself clear? Crystal clear, Alex replied coldly. Just let me see her one last time. He waved his hand dismissively, and from that moment on, everything went off the rails. Alex seemed to comply with his parents' wishes, but he became withdrawn and sullen. He walked around the house in silence, never initiating conversation, and when spoken to, he responded with bitterness and one-word answers. In short, his behavior became completely inappropriate, something that irritated both his mother and father to no end. Then something happened that no one had expected. Alex received a draft notice. He was being called up for military service, as his student deferment had just expired. He'd only gone to university for that very reason, to avoid the draft, and mostly remained enrolled by using his parents' money to pass exams, rather than actually studying. It was Richard and Rebecca who had insisted on that arrangement. They didn't want their son's head filled with any knowledge that didn't come from them. As a result, Alex was rarely seen within the university walls. Still, the university had served its main purpose, and he hadn't been drafted until now. Suddenly, they had to come up with a new plan to keep their son out of the army. The parents were actively discussing options when Alex stunned them with a new piece of madness. I'm going to serve. Time to repay my debt to the motherland. Then go, by all means. His enraged father snapped. Maybe the army will finally teach you some discipline and respect for your elders. Oh, how bitterly he regretted those words now. He should have talked him out of it, should have kept him home by force if necessary. He should have even let him keep seeing that poor girl of his. It probably wouldn't have lasted anyway. And even if it had, so what? At least their only son would still be alive and unharmed. Instead of anything else, he died. And he died in a way no one would wish on another. Essentially, he burned alive. He decided to play the hero, rushed to extinguish a warehouse that was already ablaze, filled with some nonsense. He was even awarded a medal, posthumously. But recognition clearly wasn't what he was after. Apparently, he figured that if he couldn't be with his fiancée, then there was no point in living at all. Foolish, naive, but that's how young people sometimes think. And what did he achieve in the end? He had to be buried in a closed coffin. The injuries were so severe, his body was almost entirely burned. I forced myself to look at him, and immediately turned away. The sight was simply unbearable. And now, remembering this, Leslie had been pacing around the house since early morning under her grandmother's watchful eye. It seemed like she was getting ready to go somewhere, and couldn't find an outfit suitable for the occasion. After trying on what felt like everything in her wardrobe, she finally settled on one option: a long black skirt, a short-sleeved blouse in a matching tone, and minimal jewelry. Just a few bracelets and some understated beads in the same dark colors. You look like you're dressed for a funeral, her grandmother sniffed disapprovingly. That's about right, Granny, Leslie replied hesitantly as she brushed her thick dark hair. Don't tell me you're going to that rich boy's funeral, the one who burned up in the army unit? That's exactly where I'm going. They won't be happy to see you there, my girl. They don't like us gypsies, and people like them even less so. What are you going for, anyway? Don't tell me you were in love with him? No, Granny, this has nothing to do with me personally. Well, almost nothing. I had a vision. It told me I need to be there today. Well, if it was a vision, then that's serious, Granny agreed. Then go. But still, be careful. People are cruel. Oh, so cruel. Nodding in agreement, Leslie kissed the elderly woman on the cheek and, rushing out of the house, hurried after the funeral procession. Fortunately, it could be seen from anywhere in the gated community. People like the deceased boy's parents did everything grandly and publicly. That was exactly what gave the girl a chance to catch up before the coffin was loaded into the hearse and taken to the crematorium. Leslie hadn't been completely honest with her grandmother. She did have personal reasons for such urgency. She'd been having visions since childhood, as had all the women in her family line. She had learned to trust what they showed her. Not once had her gift failed her. And this time, what she had seen was supposed to be the key to salvation. Granny, Nancy, that was her name, had been seriously ill for a long time and needed expensive treatment that the family simply couldn't afford. Not that there was much of a family to begin with, just Leslie and her grandmother. The girl's parents had died when she was still very young, and it had fallen to her maternal grandmother to raise her. Leslie loved her dearly, and when the doctors announced the diagnosis, she fell into true despair, made worse by the fact that her grandmother could be saved, but the treatment was utterly out of reach for either of them. Don't be so upset, Leslie, Nancy herself comforted her. I've lived long enough in this world, I can go on to the next. I raised you, helped you stand on your own 2 feet, I've got something to be proud of, no doubt. After I'm gone, there will still be someone to remember me. Don't say that. Leslie sobbed. You still have so much life ahead of you. I will definitely find the money for your treatment. And where would you find it, my dear? Granny chuckled. Surely you're not going to start stealing? That's not how I raised you. I won't steal, Leslie said firmly. But I will find the money. And she truly did begin looking for ways to gather the necessary sum. During the day, she worked as a cleaner at the local store, the only one in the entire neighborhood. But her evenings were completely free, and she devoted them to her mission. At first, she simply stood in different spots with an outstretched hand and a pitiful sign that read something like, "Please help treat my terminally ill grandmother." But that didn't inspire much trust or sympathy. Perhaps her appearance was to blame. Then Leslie came up with a better idea, one where her looks now worked in her favor. She knew a few simple tricks and began putting on little shows, placing a hat in front of her. Even though the gated community was mostly populated by wealthy people, there was little in the way of entertainment right there, and they gladly came to watch the performances the girl put on. For her part, she did her best to keep the local audience from getting bored. She learned new tricks, changed costumes, and created simple props with her own hands. Some, appreciating her effort, even tossed money into the hat. Counting it after each performance, Leslie realized she could actually live off this. But saving enough for expensive medical treatment this way was out of the question. Meanwhile, Nancy was getting worse and worse. The cheap alternatives to the prescribed medications did nothing to improve her condition, as the doctors had honestly warned from the start. Of course, Granny tried to hide how bad things really were so as not to worry her granddaughter. But it was impossible not to notice the obvious. Leslie couldn't think straight, and that's when the vision came. At first, it truly terrified the young Roma girl. Who wouldn't be scared? Right before her eyes, a young man, vaguely familiar, burned alive. The images flashed rapidly, but Leslie managed to grasp the essence of what she saw. And the knowledge she received promised exactly what she longed for, the cure for her grandmother. She caught up with the procession just in time. Everyone was already approaching the vehicles that would take the deceased and his family to the crematorium. Rudely pushing through the crowd, Leslie ran straight up to the hearse, just as they were about to load the coffin, and shouted in a loud, ringing voice, "Stop! You are making a terrible mistake. These gypsies have no shame." The crowd immediately stirred. "Tell me about it. That's the beggar who puts on circus acts in the middle of the night. Get lost. This is a funeral, not a stage for your performances." Unbelievable, the nerve of her. Paying no attention to them, Leslie gently touched the coffin lid and began murmuring something softly under her breath. "She's cursing the dead." A hushed whisper passed through the crowd. "What do you think you're doing?" Richard exclaimed in outrage. Along with his wife, he stepped up to the insolent gypsy girl and was just about to push her hand off the coffin. Months before all these frightening and strange events, many miles away from the ill-fated gated community, two young women were getting ready for a picnic. Both had recently turned 20, both had graduated from medical college, and were now working as nurses at a military base. On rare days off, the friends loved to escape into nature. The area around the base was breathtaking, almost untouched by civilization, with forests, crystal-clear lakes, and majestic mountains. Whenever they could, the girls would go out for a picnic, a hike, or just a walk. The older of the two, Tiffany, especially cherished these getaways. To be honest, she welcomed any chance to break away from the constant military environment and spend time away from the noise and stress. And she had good reason for that, reasons she tried not to dwell on. Her life had already been filled with too many painful experiences, and if she allowed each one to consume her, she might not have survived. Tiffany's parents had died when she was just 4 years old. She never knew the full details of what had happened. No one had ever really explained that day to her, and understandably, she remembered very little herself. All she knew was that it had been some kind of horrific accident that left her orphaned. She was raised in an orphanage, and it wasn't easy. Even though she had been fortunate enough to end up in a fairly decent facility, many of the horrors associated with orphanages had passed her by. There was no physical punishment, and she quickly learned to tune out the harsh words of the caretakers. The other children didn't bully her either. Although conflicts happened among them, Tiffany always seemed so delicate and fragile that even the most hardened troublemakers preferred to pick someone else as their target. And besides, there were always a few who were willing to protect her. Still, life in the orphanage had been hard for Tiffany. The biggest difficulty was that she still remembered her parents and a different, normal life, and compared to that, life in the home felt like a constant trial. Everything had to be done on schedule. You couldn't choose what you wanted to eat or when you could go outside. Everything was dictated by a strict routine that was difficult for her to adjust to. However, Tiffany eventually managed to adapt. More than that, she had grown so accustomed to such a rigid routine that she could no longer imagine life without it. Perhaps that was why, after graduating from college, she chose to work not just anywhere, but specifically at a military base, a place where the rules and order closely resembled those of the orphanage. It was there that Tiffany first encountered persistent male attention. She wasn't particularly beautiful, just an ordinary girl. That may have been the reason she'd never experienced anything like it in the orphanage. There were plenty of prettier girls around, and those were the ones who caught the boys' eyes. Back then, she even felt a little envious of their popularity. Now, however, the persistent advances, from both soldiers and officers, felt more annoying than flattering. Still, seeing her demeanor, most didn't cross any lines. Most, but not all. The commander of the base, Colonel Smith, seemed to believe that he could do whatever he pleased on his turf. His interests mostly revolved around drinking, bullying soldiers, and indulging in lewd thoughts. Several nurses who had previously worked there had fled the base in a panic after being honored with his unwanted attention. When the last of them finally left, unable to bear it anymore, Smith turned his sights on Tiffany. He tried to win her over using every tactic he had, though those tactics were crude and few in number. Sometimes he'd grope her inappropriately, completely unfazed by the presence of others. Other times, he'd corner her and whisper vulgar things, and worse. But Tiffany remained in the job, largely because the pay was much better than what civilian clinics offered. It was to escape these harassments that she sought out nature whenever possible. That day, she grabbed her friend and headed to the mountains, or more accurately, to the foothills. She had no plans to scale cliffs, just to enjoy a peaceful walk along the gently sloping scenic paths. They had barely set off along their planned route when Tiffany noticed something strange in the bushes, just off the trail. As she stepped closer, she gasped. It was a young man, barely conscious, tangled up in the remains of what had once been climbing gear. He must have been rock climbing, but something had gone terribly wrong, and he had fallen. Fortunately, the height from which he'd fallen wasn't too extreme, and although the stranger had clearly suffered serious injuries, he was not only alive, he was even conscious. For some reason, he couldn't call out loudly, but when he saw the girls approaching, he stirred and weakly waved his hand. That's what drew Tiffany's attention to him. "What's your name?" she asked as she rushed to his side and began examining him for injuries. "Alex," the young man croaked. "I'm Tiffany," she said with a reassuring smile. "I'm a nurse from the nearby military base. Let me give you some first aid." He closed his eyes and gave a faint nod. While Tiffany was examining and tending to the guy, her friend was explaining to the ambulance dispatcher what had happened and exactly where to send the ambulance. Meanwhile, a quiet conversation was taking place between Alex and his rescuer. "You see, I had a fight with my parents. Lately, it's been a frequent thing. They really love to control everything and refuse to understand that I'm not a kid anymore. Well, basically, every time this happens, I go to the mountains. That's my way to relax. I know I shouldn't do it in this state. Sooner or later, I was bound to slip up. Apparently, I didn't check the gear well enough." "Dreamy," Tiffany sighed. "Your parents are alive and well, even if they're like that. I think if you had parents, especially ones like mine, you'd speak differently." "Maybe," Alex sighed. "Unfortunately, we'll probably never know for sure." Damn, he suddenly realized. "Listen, do you have a phone with you?" Tiffany nodded. "Let me call my parents from it. I'll tell them I'm more or less okay. I was lying here, my phone broke. So I couldn't even call an ambulance myself." "Sure," she said, handing him her simple button phone. While Alex was talking to his parents, the ambulance arrived at the scene. The guy was carefully loaded into the vehicle and taken away, after they informed Tiffany which hospital he was being taken to, just in case. She stood for a long time, watching the flashing lights of the ambulance disappear, until her friend finally reminded her it was time to return to the unit. Tiffany understood that what was happening to her now was utterly ridiculous. She barely knew this guy, had exchanged only a few words with him. Yet, something about him caught her. Adding fuel to the fire was another fact. Alex reminded her of a man she knew. Or rather, a stranger. He was some actor whose name Tiffany, to her shame, never remembered. But his appearance stuck with her. The word liked was too weak. She considered him a real handsome guy, an ideal. To her, This was exactly how the man of her dreams should look. She had come across a photo of this actor back in childhood in one of the old magazines that the caretakers occasionally brought to the orphanage. Tiffany had cut out the picture with scissors and, of course, regretted it when it was time to return the magazine. However, it seemed no one even noticed it was damaged. And since then, the photo stayed with her, kept in a book like a little treasure. And now she had met Alex, a living person, astonishingly similar to that very prince from the picture. And, most unexpectedly, he turned out not only to be pleasant-looking but also a genuinely soulful person. A few days later, having gotten a day off, Tiffany decided to visit Alex in the hospital. The reason wasn't some suddenly sparked romantic interest, although that was beginning to show, but rather a sense of responsibility. She had been the first to help him and felt she needed to make sure her actions had actually helped. "Look who my rescuer is." Alex smiled broadly as soon as he saw her. "Come in, don't be shy." "How are you feeling?" Tiffany asked almost immediately upon entering. "Much better. They're giving me plenty of painkillers. A few bones are broken, my larynx is slightly injured, but nothing critical. Everything's healing. The doctors say if I hadn't received proper first aid before the ambulance arrived, things could have ended much worse. So, thank you very much." "No problem," Tiffany smiled. "After all, it's my job." "But you weren't at work when it happened," Alex objected. "I know a lot of young medics would have been afraid to get involved. The responsibility is huge if you do something wrong." "That's true," Tiffany nodded. "But if you don't act when you can and know how, you'll regret it your whole life. I couldn't live with that." "Me neither, probably, though I don't know. I've never been in such a situation. And I don't have any medical training," he chuckled. So quietly, they talked for almost an hour, managing to discuss what seemed like everything under the sun. Yet both felt so much was still left unsaid. They felt comfortable and interested in each other, and if not for the hospital's strict schedule, they would have happily chatted much longer. After that, Tiffany visited Alex several more times, until the day he was discharged. Their meetings then continued in more pleasant and freer places. They walked in nature, went to cafes, enjoyed slow evening strolls. Tiffany felt as if she had stepped into one of those fairy tales she loved as a child. It seemed she had finally found the one, her person. However, on one of those walks, Alex appeared as gloomy as a thundercloud. Unlike usual, he was silent and serious, hardly joking at all. No matter how much Tiffany tried to draw him out about his strange mood, she couldn't. Only near the end of their date did he gather the courage to reveal the bitter truth. "Tiffany, this is the last time we'll see each other. It hurts me deeply, but my family will never accept you. You're too poor for them, you understand." Tiffany snorted. "Something like that. They think I should marry a girl from my own class, saying marriage has nothing to do with love and all that. They even forbid me from seeing you. And what about you? Are you some little kid they can boss around? Or deep down, do you agree with them?" Tiffany asked. "No," he replied, "but, you see, I work at my father's company. If I keep seeing you, he'll fire me. And where would I find another job? I can't even imagine. I don't really have any special skills. I've spent my whole life learning just how to carry on the family business. I'm sure you'll manage. We can handle this together." Tiffany softened a bit. "You know, I'm the last person to say this, but I'm afraid we have no other choice here. You'll have to choose who matters more, you or your parents." "I understand, it's hard," Alex agreed. "But yes. You don't understand anything." Alex suddenly exploded, and without explaining anything, quickly jumped into his car and hit the gas pedal. Tiffany didn't even have time to realize how she was left alone. Near the park exit, she somehow hobbled to the nearest bench, sat down, and wept bitterly. That's how all those fairy tales about handsome princes end. In real life, it was long past time for her to grow up. Like a child, Leslie had believed in a miracle. The next few weeks passed for Tiffany like a fog. She tried to somehow get through the painful breakup, but it wasn't going well. During the day, she threw herself into work, but at night she couldn't sleep, sometimes lying flat on her bed for hours, occasionally breaking into quiet, inconsolable sobs. Alex was having a hard time too, of course. Despite his decision, his parents were still unhappy. They didn't like that their son had become distant and constantly in a foul mood. Well, what exactly were they expecting, he thought. Don't they know what love is? He was almost ready to believe it. Alex managed barely 3 weeks without talking to Tiffany, then unexpectedly brought up the topic again at a family dinner, even surprising himself. His mother, as was her recent habit, began to complain about him. Alex, why do you eat so little? Are you trying to starve yourself? Usually, he ignored such digs or muttered something unintelligible. But that day, he looked his mother straight in the eyes and, as if challenging her, said, "Maybe I am." "How dare you talk to your mother like that?" Richard barked at him immediately. "And how else am I supposed to talk to people who've taken away the most precious thing in my life?" Alex shot back. His parents just laughed in response. "Drop your teenage rebellion, Alex. You're not a kid anymore," Rebecca said. "What precious thing did we take away from you?" she asked. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," he replied. Of course, of course." "The girl? What was her name?" "Tiffany. Just think about what she can give you. What can you get from this relationship? But let's keep it real, no airy-fairy stuff like love or anything like that." "I'm not going to discuss this with you," the boy cut in. "Whether you like it or not, I've thought it through and made my decision. I don't need your money, your connections, or anything else. I want Tiffany. I'm going to see her and eventually marry her, no matter what you think." He's made his decision. Look at him. Richard spoke quietly but with menace. "All right, pup, all decisions in this house, as long as I'm alive, are made by me." "No problem," Alex snorted. "You made a decision in this house?" Richard asked. "Well, I think I'll leave it and make decisions in my own house. I think that would be the right thing. After all, as you yourself noted, I'm no longer a kid." "Listen to me," the father continued in the same ominous tone, seemingly ignoring his words. "You can say whatever nonsense comes to your head, and if you can't think about the consequences for yourself, then imagine what might happen to the girl you love. Let me put it more clearly. If you don't throw that foolishness out of your head, I will find ways to deal with your Tiffany once and for all. I've already warned you." Yeah, guess it didn't sink in. Shocked by this statement, Alex simply got up from the table and went back to his room. He knew perfectly well his father was not the kind of man to throw empty threats around. Worse still, he truly had the means to carry out his words. The least harmful thing that crossed Alex's mind was that Richard was fully capable of ruining Tiffany's career, not just getting her fired from a specific unit, but making sure she could never get a job in her profession anywhere at all. Of course, his father didn't know exactly where Tiffany worked, but that was only a matter of time. Alex was too scared even to think about all the other possibilities. He knew better than anyone that his father was capable of truly cruel actions. Once upon a time, back in his childhood, he was unlucky enough to witness one of those incidents. At that time, Richard, without the slightest embarrassment in front of his young son, beat a man. The man was taken to the ICU. And what happened to him afterward? The boy never found out. And the father turned to Alex and, as if nothing had happened, said, "This man owed me a large sum of money, which he refused to pay back. Remember, son, you have to get what's yours by any means necessary. Do you understand me?" "I understand," the shocked boy replied, trying not to cry. What he clearly understood was that his father wouldn't like to see him cry. Needless to say, Richard faced absolutely no punishment for that incident. Maybe some connections helped where they needed to, or maybe he paid someone off, or perhaps both. Alex had no doubt that if the situation called for it, his father was quite capable of doing something like that again. The young man no longer wanted to stay with his parents, but couldn't imagine how to leave home without the consequences of that decision catching up to him or his beloved. Help came from an unexpected place. He received a draft notice calling him to serve in the military. Grasping this tiny chance, Alex announced to his parents that he wasn't going to run from the draft but intended to serve his full term. Fortunately, they did not object. And thanks to his father's connections, the young man managed to get assigned to the same military unit where Tiffany worked. Luckily, explaining this desire was easy. The unit was well located and generally considered one of the best. Seeing him among the new soldiers, Tiffany was stunned. She definitely hadn't expected such a turn of events. For several days, Alex couldn't manage to talk to her. He suspected the girl was hiding, not wanting to see him. Nevertheless, he was persistent enough for a conversation to finally take place. "What do you want?" Tiffany grumbled unfriendly. "How are you?" "That's not very polite of you," Alex replied. "You see, I joined the army just to be near you." "I see. And what will happen when your service is over? Will you go back to your mom and dad under their wing?" Alex sighed heavily. "Listen, Tiffany, I'm ready to do anything for you, even cut ties with my family. But there's a problem. No matter where we run or what we do, my father will find us. You don't know him, darling. He's a terrifying man. It's not that my parents are more important to me than you. It's that I'm afraid for you." Some time passed before he finally managed to convince Tiffany that he wasn't joking or exaggerating. But in the end, she believed him. "The possible escape routes lie in the coffin," Leslie said quietly but clearly. "That's not your son, don't you see? Even if you're telling the truth, how are we supposed to see that?" Rebecca threw up her hands. "If you really are a fortune teller, aren't you aware of how badly he's been disfigured by fire? And look at the back of the left hand. Is there a birthmark there?" Hearing this, Richard slowly began to open the coffin lid. He didn't even understand why he was listening to this strange gypsy woman. Perhaps it was because, for a brief moment, she gave him hope that the dead boy really wasn't his son, which meant Alex was most likely alive. Finally lifting the lid, he forced himself to look at the body again. Slowly, Richard shifted his gaze to the hand he hadn't looked at before. And to his surprise, the place where the birthmark used to be was almost the only part untouched by the fire. Seeing this, the distraught father exclaimed joyfully, "It's true!" Telling the relieved parents, because otherwise it might have been too late, Richard and Rebecca acted immediately. After what had just happened, it was hard to deny that this strange woman really possessed some gift beyond their understanding. That meant it was worth listening to her words. At the last moment, they managed to run out onto the platform. There they saw their son alive and unharmed. Next to him stood a pretty girl. When Alex's parents arrived, the young couple was just about to load their modest belongings onto the train that was about to depart. "Alex!" Richard shouted. "Alex, son, wait, don't go." The man was almost crying, partly. And Rebecca finally shed a tear. She had managed to keep her composure at the funeral, but now, seeing her living son before her, she could no longer hold back her emotions. However, she was unpleasantly struck by the way Alex looked at them. His eyes showed fear and hopelessness. The young couple froze, watching their parents approach and waiting to see how this meeting would end. Running away was already useless. First, Alex's mother and father now knew where they were headed. And second, since they had seen their son alive, they would definitely find him no matter where he went. Their perfect plan had crashed spectacularly, and there was no hope left. "Let's go, we need to talk," Richard said. They had no choice but to agree. However, the whole car ride was filled with tense silence. The young couple was terribly scared by what had happened and didn't understand how they had been found at all. The parents, for their part, had no idea how to start the inevitable difficult conversation. At home, Rebecca managed to ease the tension a little. "Sit down at the table," she cooed gently. "We were actually preparing for a memorial, but now I think we can turn it into a festive meal. Eat, children, you must be hungry. I doubt the army unit feeds you very well." "Mom, Dad," Alex began as everyone sat down at the table. "Wait," his father interrupted. "Otherwise, you might say something you'll regret later." "You don't need to say anything," Richard's wife supported him. "We should be the ones apologizing to both of you. Our behavior was completely unacceptable. We thought we realized that too late, but fortunately, everything turned out okay." Alex blinked, wondering if his parents had been replaced during the time he served in the army and then executed his escape plan. "Now I understand why you talked about love," Richard said in the meantime. "And I see how much you love this girl. But you used to deny the whole concept of love." Alex was surprised. "Well, certain events made me change my mind," his father replied. Now Alex had to make an effort not to cry. After all, he loved his parents too, and now, apparently, he didn't have to choose between them and Tiffany. "Well, I should apologize too," he said, "for causing you so much pain. I didn't want that, but unfortunately, I saw no other options." "We understand you," his father replied. "But tell us, how did you manage to pull all this off? And who is that poor guy we almost buried instead of Alex?" Rebecca added. "He must have had relatives, right?" "Actually, it all happened almost by accident," Alex began to explain. "No, he had no relatives. He was homeless but, strangely enough, looked somewhat like me. Tiffany always felt sorry for him and even fed him sometimes. Apparently, not enough," Tiffany added. "At least, I don't know what else could have made him climb into that ill-fated warehouse except extreme hunger. I think he even drank something stronger beforehand to muster courage, because it's not easy to get into a storage area located on a military base. Such places usually have decent security. And yet, this poor guy managed to get inside," Alex continued. "Probably set something on fire while drunk, couldn't get out, the poor guy burned." "A tragic fate for that guy," sighed Tiffany. "When Alex and I rushed to save him, there was no one left, only his bag somehow survived. And it contained documents, as it turned out." "We arrived on the scene first," said Alex. "That's when I got the idea of how to make our escape, which, to be honest, we had been planning for some time. I saw how badly he was burned and knew no one would look too closely." "So you slipped your documents into his bag," Tiffany interrupted. "As I understand, that was enough to avoid any additional identification procedures." "That hardly justifies us," Tiffany joined in the conversation. "But we weren't only worried about ourselves. At the time, we had a unit commander who made life miserable for everyone. And if the death of some stray homeless man in a fire could be overlooked, soldiers were another matter. We hadn't been able to find the right to him for several years, and now there was a clear violation of fire safety regulations with serious consequences. Whatever the case, his activities are now being investigated thoroughly, and he will most likely lose his position. Maybe more than that. So, Alex continued, I put my documents in his bag and took his for myself. Luckily, he really did look a lot like me. And the photo hanging in the commander's office for several years was hard to tell who it was. So starting a new life under a different name was basically easy. That's the whole story. By the way, Richard and Rebecca really realized that they had been interfering too much in their adult son's life. They understood that they loved him, and feeling it themselves, they figured out why Alex held on so tightly to Tiffany and were no longer willing to stand in the young couple's way. They decided to cover the expenses for the homeless boy's funeral, especially since most of it was already paid for. They just had to order a new tombstone with his name and purchase a new plot in the cemetery. After all, keeping him in the family plot would have been too much. They didn't forget about the fortune teller. A few days after these events, Alex's parents showed up at her doorstep. Leslie, of course, had sensed their arrival in advance and even prepared a simple treat. You helped us bring back our only son's family, Richard said. You probably don't know, Leslie replied, but when you use a gift, you can't accept money for it, or it disappears. But surely there's something we can do for you? Richard asked perceptively. Of course, Leslie smiled. That might also require money, but you don't have to give it directly. You can accept gifts. The best gift for me right now would be the recovery of my beloved grandmother. She's been ill for a long time, and the medicines we can afford aren't enough to cure her. Richard and Rebecca paid for Nancy's full course of treatment, not only the medicines but also procedures and the rehabilitation program afterward. As a result, the elderly woman fully recovered. It even seemed she became more active and healthier than before. A year after all these events, Alex and Tiffany got married. They bought a small house near where Richard and Rebecca lived. Every weekend, the whole family gets together, sometimes in one cottage, sometimes in the other, and sometimes they all go out into nature. Alex continues to work at his father's company. Tiffany left the military unit and started working at a civilian hospital. Leslie is more than satisfied with her current situation. And soon, the family is expecting a new addition. As for Colonel Smith, the court found a large amount of evidence of his official misconduct. Many people, including soldiers and nurses who had been at that military base, testified. As a result, he received a long prison sentence and was banned from holding any government positions in the future.